Happy Valentine's Day, my squires. Alternatively, happy discounted chocolate day for those of the maidenless variety. In the spirit of romance and being spiteful to the sentiment that Transformers shouldn't date or have girls because they're robots, I wanted to talk about the most prominent female character in the franchise and how part of her growth in the series can be reflected through the relationships she's had over the years. We're going to be talking about Arcee and her many relationships across continuities, from the Sunbow cartoon up to the modern day. Starting off as a character who Generation 1 writer Ron Friedman fought for on behalf of his daughter to give young female fans someone to look up to, Arcee entered the scene in Transformers the movie back in 1986, as sort of a Princess Leia equivalent in the very Star Wars inspired picture. While her inclusion would pave the way for other female characters to be added during Season 2's development, Arcee herself wasn't given as much to do in the original series after the movie, and sort of fell to the wayside as a result. This is reflected at least somewhat in her relationships throughout that time period. Interestingly, her first is arguably the least significant. Despite flirtatious framing in their limited interactions in the movie, her and Hot Rod don't really have much chemistry or, indeed, screen time together across any of their appearances, even post G1. While the two can be seen working together in instances like the Marvel Comics and Beast Wars tie-in in 3H series, where she's part of Rodimus's Wreckers unit, the pair never seem to pick up a full romantic relationship in any of these outings. Perhaps to take one last note from Star Wars, aside from the unfortunate implications of pairing characters inspired by Luke and Leia together, Arcee's affections in the Sunbow continuity shifted over to Springer after the events of the film, with more overt instances such as the former running into the latter's arms after he's repaired in 5 Faces of Darkness Part 4. However, a common and honestly weird trend in hindsight is that after the cartoons, Arcee rarely, if ever, appears alongside either of her prospective paramours in later entries. There hasn't been a proper 86 crew reunion in later media at all, mind you. You could say she's come close to reuniting with Hot Rod and Spirit through Smokescreen and Transformers Prime, but she has yet to cross paths with either as her character and priorities have shifted since the 80s. Before we leave the cartoon end of G1, however, I want to give an honorable mention to her relationship with Chrome Dome in the Japanese G1 continuity. Along with being shunted even further into the background as a secretary, stay classy, 80s Japan, her relationship with Springer is seemingly disregarded as one of the titular headmasters develops feelings for her, culminating later in the series with the two slow dancing in a tender moment. Arguably the most intimate show in one of Arcee's relationships in the cartoon, but that isn't saying much at this stage now, is it? Now Arcee has enjoyed other official relationships, one with pre-mainstay status Bumblebee in one of the earlier G.I. Joe crossovers, where he is killed off right in front of her. I'm sure that won't become a trend. And this technically isn't canon, but more casual fans tend to match her up with Optimus Prime, seemingly confusing the former with Elita 1 or simply misremembering the first on-screen female character and replacing her with the more popular representative, with some acknowledgement from Hasbro staff, such as toy designer Aaron Archer using a custom movie Optimus Prime and Takara exclusive G1 colored Arcee as cake toppers for his wedding. So while not an uncommon matchup, far from being canon. Probably a good thing considering the implied age gap between them in every setting. Even done in reverse order for TFA, weirdly enough. So, yeah. It seemed very clear that most creators during the original run of G1 and sometime after didn't really know what to do with her. And that is a trend that unfortunately remained for her begrudging live-action appearance. Initially axed from the 07 movie, Arcee made her big screen return alongside Chromia and Elita 1 in Revenge of the Fallen, as a trio of motorcycle scouts who start off strong as key figures of the opening scenes before being unceremoniously picked off in the final battle as a consequence of the writers and Michael Bay's apathy towards female Cybertronians. Born from the stubborn, Furman-based notion that you would need to explain the girl robots. None of the Arcee triplets get much characterization in the films, much less a chance to explore romantic interests. Even in spite of Chromia being present alongside Ironhide, her partner from the original cartoon and in some later entries, as well as Optimus and Elita. Arcee and her sisters did get the chance to shine in the IDW tie-in comics as individual characters, with Arcee herself hosting a tongue-in-cheek singles ad column called Arcee's Soulmates. Progress? Perhaps not, but things would look brighter for Arcee in Transformers Animated, at least to some degree. While not developed very well either, Arcee is painted in a more flattering light as a key intelligence officer in the Autobot Elite Guard throughout TFA, her first appearance coming in the form of a flashback with her implied romantic partner in this continuity, the curmudgeonly Ratchet. While nothing overt happens between them, perhaps to avoid any sentiments of "ew, old people are kissing" from the children watching, Ratchet and Arcee do take an obvious shine to each other. While the canonicity of this story is debatable, they do get the most explicit development out of any of Arcee's relationships thus far in the TF Nation Trial of Megatron reading, as Ratchet and Arcee attempt multiple dates despite the chaotic situation around them, following the events of the series finale. Ratchet even bestows Arcee with her otherwise Toyline exclusive swords as a gift. Granted, they're supposed to be laser pointers and contribute to Arcee's role as a teacher in that continuity, but it's nice to see a bit more thought put into Arcee's characterization and how that reflects through Ratchet. But, of course, instances like these were mostly supplemental and their on-screen chemistry was not spotlighted very much. Amusingly though, this romantic interest is somewhat alluded to in the following series, Transformers Prime, as Ratchet expresses interest in Arcee, after the former alters his personality with the use of synthetic energon. By this point though, Arcee is more firmly established as a warrior comparable to her male counterparts, and the writing does reflect that, with more character-driven focus relating to her vendetta against the likes of Starscream and Arachnid for the murder of her partners Cliffjumper and Tailgate rather than any romantic pursuits. Though one could debate about the extent of her connection to Cliffjumper, and a somewhat unfortunate fan alternative involves her being romantically entangled with her human companion, Jack Darby. Look at me. Look at me. No. She is very clearly a mother figure to him, and Smokescreen for that matter. If Arcee is going to hook up with any human in Transformers Prime, it's June. Stop it! Shame on you. Similar to her predecessor's relationship with Cliffjumper, Cyberverse Arcee enjoys a close friendship with Grimlock, the two even headlining one of the more experimental episodes of the short series, but neither express any degree of romantic interest, reflecting a more independent idea of the character and a lack of desire, or at least compulsion, to pair the character off romantically with another. Her limited appearances in the currently running Earthspark reflect this as well, with a more platonic matchup with her one-time partner Bumblebee. This self-sustaining approach to the character has even been utilized in recent live-action efforts, as her counterpart in Rise of the Beasts was going to have a relationship with the ever-controversial Wheeljack in earlier cuts of the film, but those moments were left on the cutting room floor with little indication, save for the two sticking close to each other in certain shots. So, okay, we've definitely come a long way from the aimless "let's stick her with a different guy this week" approach to earlier incarnations to one spearheaded by more prominent feminine creators with a passion for exploring the character more as an individual in recent decades. Definitely a nice side effect of the generations who grew up with the early versions of Arcee getting the chance to reimagine the character Ron Friedman fought so hard to include for that exact reason. But that isn't to say that Arcee can't be a strong individual character while having deeper personal connections with another. For the best of both worlds, one must turn to the mainline IDW publishings and explore another interesting side effect of the younger, more open-minded generations influencing the trajectory of the character. The fact that her most interesting romantic relationships involve another woman. Supposedly the first female Cybertronian in that setting, Arcee started life as a very aggressive and unfortunate transgender character who didn't seem to have much solid direction, or interest like her original incarnation, mostly being used for shock value or the occasional exploitative cover, one especially infamous for both the poor rendering, and one later still for aging terribly. Of all the notes they could have taken from her original Leia inspiration, why did it have to be accidental incest? Thankfully, with the arrival of writers like M. Scott and retcons that resolved the need to explain a female character, writers were able to go back in and put a more delicate touch on the character's origin, and make her a more palatable interpretation. Someone that could still be a formidable warrior, but one that could explore a more friendly and tender side with other characters, like Prowl, Sideswipe, and rather abruptly her romantic partner in Aileron as this entry neared its conclusion. I'd like to imagine that this version of Arcee and Chrome Dome dated for a hot minute early on before realizing they were both, incompatible for a number of reasons, only to reunite post-series and essentially do the Spider-Man pointing thing over the fact that they both ended up in same-sex relationships with mini-bot partners. However, her most consistent relationship to date comes in the short-lived follow-up continuity before IDW lost the license to the series. Paired up with fellow G1 fembot Greenlight, this Arcee could be described pretty well as a culmination of the best traits of her prior selves. Cunning and seasoned like IDW 1 and animated, but IDW 2 Arcee still has that warmth and protective drive like her G1 and Prime selves. Playing well off of her more soft-spoken counterpart in their young Charge, who acts as a sort of adopted daughter. And that isn't just subtext either. Arcee and Greenlight's relationship and their joint roles in Gage's life are so far the only instance of such a relationship extending past the original continuity it spawned from, as more overtly G1-inspired takes on the older femmes are compared directly to a lesbian couple in a similar situation in the Transformers X My Little Pony crossover titled A Real Mother. A nice way to bring the character full circle after so many drastically different takes over the decades since her creation. From a promising start lacking solid direction to a much more independent and assertive character, it's pleasing to see Arcee's growth reflected through the company she keeps across different entries. It seems safe to say, while it's been a bumpy road getting there, Arcee has lived up to Ron Friedman's original hopes for the character to inspire a more diverse group of fans, and then some. Only time will tell how the character will continue to evolve, but whether she's standing alone or walking with a loved one by her side, when a new entry in the series comes along, you can count on Arcee to steal the show and our hearts.